Perfect. Thanks everybody for being patient. Sorry about that. My daughter actually ran, I forgot the remote control to the projector, so my daughter ran all the way from Ellenville with remote control. And the reason I bought the projector was so I didn't have problems with other people's projectors, and I've only used the projector twice. I haven't used it since October, so sorry about that. Okay, so it's great to see some people that we know, that I know. It's awesome, and welcome to the new people. How did everybody find out about it? I'm assuming internet, Facebook, okay. And you told the staff last night you were coming in?
Yes.
Okay, because like there's a couple coming tomorrow, and I was like, okay. So quick, super brief history about me and the restaurant. I'm a professionally trained chef, been cooking for 25 plus years, been in the industry since I was 14. I'm now 43. At 28 years old, I had a scare. Went to the doctor and he wanted to prescribe another medication. I was already on 4 or 5 medications. I was about 250 pounds. I had asthma my whole life, acid reflux so bad they wanted to operate. I had high blood pressure. I was a chef on top of it, so I was eating everything I was cooking for our guests, and I was working at some really nice places too, and it was a shame that this is what places think of as good food that doesn't honor the environment and doesn't honor our bodies and health. And it's all about getting things to taste really, really good with the addition of lots of white flour, lots of white sugar, lots of butter, deep frying things, and then repeating that whole cycle again and then giving you some alcohol on top of it. And this was the reality of the fine dining industry that I was trained under. And at 28 years old, the doctor now said to me, you need blood cholesterol medication. And I said, I don't want to do any more meds. I don't want to do any more. And he was like, you need to. For some reason, I don't know how he did it, but I convinced him to have me come back in 30 days and give more blood in 30 days. I don't know how I did it, but he's like, I'll give you 30 days. You're coming back, you're giving me more blood. I immediately went to the health food store and picked up a bunch of books in the health food store. I think it was my first time really in a health food store, like trying to find something to actually, beneficial. And I picked up a couple of books, started reading them, and I kind of knew what I wanted to jump into. And 30 days later, I went back to give him blood, and my cholesterol dropped 75 points. And within 3 months, my asthma was gone. I was on I was on prescription deodorant because I would sweat yellow. I was just toxic. I was literally, everybody who walked into the restaurant, I was killing them every night with their fork, and I was killing myself on a much quicker pace. So in 1998, I had the privilege of going to a conference on sustainable food. And I sat next to a guy by the name of Henry Lovejoy. And Henry had just opened a company called EcoFish. And Henry was like myself. Henry came from the traditional seafood industry, and he saw everything that was happening in the seafood industry and what was wrong with it. And he said, I'm going to form a wholesale distribution company to sell to chefs that is going to focus on clean seafood, sustainable seafood, seafood with enough population, and all kinds of issues that we're going to talk about today. And I immediately connected with him, and I was his first wholesale customer of EcoFish. You can now find EcoFish in health food stores, and it's called Henry and Lisa's Natural Seafood. So if you go into a health food store, Whole Foods or something, look it up. They're in the freezer. Really, really great company. And I watched them grow from just a couple to, they must have 20 employees now, and he's really an authority on this. So I learned from Henry. Henry was my mentor for a while on seafood. I would call him and ask him questions. I was on the phone with him every week, of course, ordering seafood. So, 10 worst seafood to eat and what to eat instead. What makes a fish bad? Chemical residues in flesh. Whether they're farmed, mostly farmed though, and wild as well. People often say, well, gee, wild is the best seafood to eat. Or they say, totally avoid farmed salmon. Or I'm sorry, totally avoid farmed fish altogether. And there's some farms that are doing a fantastic job. There's some farms that are leading the industry. There's certain fish as a whole that the farming methods are good. And there's certain fish as a whole that the farming methods are bad. And so for example, salmon is one of those that the whole industry, no matter what they do and initiatives they do and how they want to progress and make you think what they're doing a good job, the industry is just not good to begin with. So they can claim all these things, and at the bottom of the day is they're still in a bad industry doing marginally better activities. Low population count. It's extremely important because for fish to be sustainable to the oceans are a very, very vital, important part of our ecosystem, you need a certain amount of population of each fish, and we've learned to decimate fish in the wild. It's like cod. Cod has been totally decimated. It's still commercially fished. Wild salmon, Atlantic salmon, is a prime example of a fish that's totally been decimated. Sea bass was an example in the 70s of something that really was decimated. Very strong regulations came in certain states like New Jersey, you still can't serve wild striped sea bass. They only can serve farmed striped sea bass. So the U.S. quickly adopted regulations, and now sea bass is one of those success stories that there is enough population. It's available in restaurants again, but not in New Jersey. And it is available commercially caught, which is nice to see that by making regulations and doing a difference that things do happen for the positive. But there's certain fish that just never have a fighting chance. There's certain fish like orange roughy that just take so long to reproduce, and we're catching these fish way before they have a chance to reproduce. There's also other issues with orange roughy like Mercury. Habitat destruction when harvesting. When you see the Forrest Gump movie and there's catching shrimp on the boat there and they dump all that shrimp, that's very fabricated, how the typical shrimping industry works. For every shrimp that you actually put on your plate that goes into your mouth, for every 1 pound, 7 to 15 pounds of other fish are caught and typically discarded, because on that boat they're not equipped to process anything else but shrimp. And the way you harvest a lot of shrimp is called dredging. Basically, you take a rake on the bottom of the ocean and you pull this rake for miles in the ocean, and it creates this tumbling effect, and you get sea coral, which is habitat destruction, and all this other fish in its way. Once you get up to the top, you have to sort through it. A lot of the fish is dead, dying, and non-useful at that point, so it just gets thrown overboard. A friend of mine a few years back did commercial fishing in the Carolinas, and he was on a mahi-mahi boat. Now, mahi-mahi is great because in prime season, it gains 10% of its weight every day. Super sustainable, grows fast, reproduces, great. So they're out fishing for mahi-mahi, and there's several different ways to fish for it. You can have one pole, one hook, one line, which is called pole caught or hook and line caught, or you can take a string of 1,000 hooks and put them on what's called a long line. And that sits out in the ocean for hours, if not all day. And they wait for those hooks to fill up, and they reel these hooks in hydraulically, and you have the fish on the hooks. Well, he said, Marcus, if we're on the wrong side of the current, we're not catching mahi. He goes, we're catching sharks. And we're not equipped to sell shark, process shark. We're not in the shark industry business. So what do? He goes, each hook costs $1. So instead of cutting and letting the hook go with the shark, you cut the jaw out of the fish and throw the fish back into the ocean. He goes, the sharks just die there left and right. But again, mahi is a sustainable catch, but now how's it being caught is the next question to ask. So typically when you go to a fish market and you see, let's say some mahi because we're on that topic. If you see mahi for $5 and you see mahi for $10, the mahi-mahi that's $10 is most likely line caught. The other mahi is long line caught, or maybe it's net caught. So certain fish are good for netting, certain fish aren't good for netting, it depends where you're at fishing and what's going on. So of course, this is such an involved, in-depth topic that I don't want to overwhelm anybody. I would pick, we limited to 10 fish today, so I would pick your 4 or 5 favorite fish and focus on that, on what you typically eat. This presentation will be online, and there's a lot of good resources that you can look online. Years ago in the restaurant, we used to hand out little pocket cards for sustainable seafood, so you can eat sustainable seafood wherever you go. Now you can just go on your phone and download an app, and there's tons of apps out there for that. So possible resources. Monterey Bay Aquarium does a seafood watch. Now, of course, all these agencies might be a little biased on one thing or not. The bottom line is this is an industry. This industry is fueled by economics. Chicken, you can go to the store and buy organic chicken. You can go to any grocery store and buy organic chicken and guarantee that chicken has been doused with chlorine. Well, chlorine's not organic, and it's not really a thing you put in organic food. But for the players to play organic, you have to allow loopholes. So when they make guidelines, there's typically a loophole here and there to allow this economic force of an industry to play the game. And that's just how it typically works. So not all chicken is doused with chlorine. If you buy Murray's chicken uses electrolysis. So if you're familiar with ionized water, acid, alkaline, we have alkaline water at the restaurant. We have a machine. Basically, Murray's chicken soaks their chicken in a electrolysis water, so an acid water, and then rinses it out from there. So some companies do different than others. So, but as a general whole, these industries are made to have certain loopholes, so these big companies can play the game. Food and Water Watch is a good one. I like fishchoice.com, my personal favorite. It's more geared towards industry, but consumers can use it as well. As an industry chef, I can go online and say, I'm looking for albacore tuna that's lying caught. And it's going to list 25 people that sell that I can go to and buy. And then it's going to say, it's going to list 10 of the other seafood rating systems out there that are what they rate it. So I can look at Monterey Bay Aquarium, I can look at Friends of the Sea, I can look at MSC, which is Marine Stewardship Council. So I can look across the board and see what other rating systems are applying to that fish through fishchoice.com. So fishchoice.com rounds up suppliers, and they round up all the other rating systems, which is good. So then you can say side by side, look at this, there's some discrepancy or there's not a discrepancy. Marine Stewardship Council is an okay one, but it's expensive for the players for the people to get certified. If I wanted to advertise Marine Stewardship Council on my menu, they would require like $1,200 a year for me just to put their name, their logo on our menu. So they're a business. They're a business. They do have expenses. Some of them do make a profit. Some of them are nonprofit. How and why do I care? I realized a long time ago as a chef that I can influence 10 people, 20 people, 100 people a night. And if I can eliminate 4 ounces of swordfish from your diet and replace it with something else that's more sustainable, then I have power. And if I can do that 364 nights a year, then there's power in that. And then if we can get other chefs on board, then we have a movement. And then things happen like like wild striped sea bass coming back, and really an awareness on Chilean sea bass, an awareness on swordfish. Swordfish was in danger of population as well, and a lot of chefs stepped forward and said, no, we're not gonna serve swordfish. A lot of chefs in the late 90s said take a pass on Chilean sea bass, which isn't sea bass, by the way, it's Patagonian toothfish. It's a trade name. They know, again, this is an industry, and they know how to market to you. And bass is a cool word, right? Bass is a really cool word. Patagonian toothfish, you won't pay for Patagonian toothfish. So there's a scientific name, and there's the trade name. Rockfish, Pacific rockfish, all the bycatch, this is good and bad, all the bycatch that we're talking about in shrimp, well, when they're fishing on the West Coast, there are certain species of fish, they have all this bycatch, and they can't sell all these weird scientific names or these names of these fish, so they lump in 14, 15 species of fish, and they call it Pacific rockfish. They're all similar once you take the skin and the head and fillet it. It's all white flesh at that point. So the average consumer doesn't know, but it's really 14 or 15 different fish. Is it wrong? Not really. It's marketing, and it's a trade name as opposed to the scientific name. And in one way, it's allowing these underutilized fish that might get thrown back into the ocean, not used, now to go to an end food source. And it all stemmed from earlier when I first started this, that I care about what I eat. I honestly care about what I eat. It made a change in my life. I was able to drop every single medication. I lost weight. My doctor was shocked. Never asked me what I did, by the way, because of course he's in an industry where he's protecting his revenue and couldn't share that with anybody else, right? Obviously, because it is the better thing to do. How to buy fish, fresh or frozen? What's the opposite of, I mean, people always say, oh, I buy fresh fish, I don't buy frozen fish. So then I always ask them, I say, well, what's the opposite of fresh? And they go, I go, opposite of fresh is rotten. Frozen fish isn't rotten, is it? So, in fact, frozen fish in most instances is fresher than fresh fish. And when I was at the CIA, at the Culinary Institute of America in '98, when I met Henry from EcoFish, we were doing a tasting that very same seminar where they put 5 salmon on the plate. And they were all numbered. And 80 chefs were in the room. And they went through and tasted all these fish. And all of us thought we knew which fish was frozen, right? We said, we nailed the frozen fish, this and this. 80% of these, 80 chefs, 90% of these chefs picked the frozen at sea Alaskan salmon over fresh farm salmon, over fresh wild salmon. It was amazing. And we were all blown away because the industry has changed on the frozen side. Technology is much better. And people, the producers, some of the producers are much more conscious. There's a producer out there, Bruce Gore, a catcher out of Oregon, Washington, that he only catches what he has an order for. So you have to order his fish. His seafood distributors earmark what they want for the year, and he only goes and catches what he has orders for and then ceases production. But what he does once he gets the fish caught is he massages them, back bleeds them, and gets them in cryogenically frozen before they have time to hit rigor mortis.
What do you mean he massages them?
They massage the fish. They massage them, black beat them. It's a way of lowering the pH or raising the pH, whatever the scientific. I don't know the scientific pHs of fish, which is best, and that I do know beef. Beef is ideal at 5.7. It's the most tender, so 5.6, 5.7. So there's a science behind it. I'm not aware of all that science, but it's for palatability, and so yeah. So he gets that fish frozen. So by the time you get it on your plate, by the time you get it in your house, by the time I would get it as a restaurateur and pull it out of the freezer and start defrosting it, it has 0 microbes. 0 microbes on defrosting. The fish you're buying that's fresh in the grocery store could be 7, 10 days old. It's loaded with a lot more microbial count. That clock has been ticking much, much longer. Now, as an experiment, I was taught as a young chef, well, seafood can last 21 days. I said, that's impossible. I was working at the Greenbrier in West Virginia in 1994, and we had a demo. They came in from Connolly Seafood out of Boston and said, if you properly ice seafood and it's properly handled and you use gloves, you don't contaminate bacteria, 21-day shelf life on fish. I'm thinking, this guy's crazy. Well, a couple years later, I was getting a tilapia delivery in Colorado. We were buying tilapia from a local small farm. And I said, let me try that experiment that guy was talking about from Steve Connolly Seafood. And sure enough, 20 days later, that tilapia was still good and we actually ate it. It was delivered live. We processed it immediately, stuck it on ice, plastic, never touched with our hands, plastic gloves, changed the ice every day, let it drip off. 20 days later, we logged this at the restaurant in Colorado. It was still edible. So when you walk into and you smell that fishy smell in a market, it's not supposed to smell like that. Certain seafood you do want a smell on it, like scallops. When you open the container of scallops, you get that fresh scallop smell. That smell is good, but you really don't want to smell seafood. So.
Marcus, is the vacuum pack like the best when you're going to buy frozen from the store?
Yes. So there's a company, Alaska Gold. If you're buying salmon, you go to ShopRite. I know ShopRite has Alaska Gold. Alaska Gold is really a great producer. Most of their fish are line caught, single line, single hook. They're not netted. It's a co-op of producers in Alaska. Alaska Gold, you can find it at ShopRite. You can go in and buy a side of wild salmon for like $12.99 a pound, $11.99 a pound. It's really a good brand. I'm really impressed with them. I've personally used their product in the past. So of course, frozen for me is the way to go as a chef because it allows me to serve the most freshest seafood to the guest. And this even goes across the board, like soft-shell crabs. Soft-shell crabs are very perishable because they're caught, they're fragile. They just shed their skin, their shell, their outside shell. So it's a fragile crab. They perish very easily. Well, when you get the box flown into you and shipped to you, you always have a few that have always perished in there, and you will always get 1 or 2 that stink really bad. Then the chef has to go in and figure it out. When they harvest it, they can process it, freeze it immediately, and you can save all that time. So I'm a huge fan of frozen. Not every frozen seafood is good. You just need to realize you need to look for a couple key terms like frozen at sea or frozen on shore. That means they're catching it and freezing it right away. So they can shorten that gap of catching to freezing. Okay, fish number 1, imported catfish. Catfish is probably one of the top 3 fish consumed in the world. and I think it might be number 2 in the US. Tilapia is number 1. Why it's bad? Nearly 90% of catfish are imported to the US come from Vietnam, where the use of antibiotics that are banned in the US are used widespread there. Furthermore, the 2 varieties of Vietnamese catfish sold in the US, Swai and Basa, aren't technically considered catfish by the federal government and therefore aren't held to the same inspection rules that other imported catfish are. So catfish is very popular in restaurants, and a lot of wholesalers do sell frozen catfish from Vietnam, from China. Seafood that gets inspected that comes into the US is less than 2%. And there's always, I always follow the seafood fraud cases because a lot of seafood is mislabeled. There's a lot of fraud in seafood. And even from the big producers, the big packers, because once you take a white flesh, there's no skin, there's no head, there's no identification for that fillet anymore. Catfish is a little unique, you can see it, but Basa looks just like it once it's filleted. And, so now you're at a trade name versus a scientific name versus they're just throwing whatever they want in the box.
Why are antibiotics given? These are farmed fish and they're
Too crowded.
Or
Disease, polluted waters, crowded. The Mekong Delta, if you go online, look up Mekong Delta, you will see it's one of the largest habitated rivers in the world. People live above them on stilted houses. Well, you know what their water facility is? They go to the bathroom, it drops right into the river. And the Mekong Delta has a huge farming area for fish. Majority of the fish that come out of Asia come from the Mekong Delta. So as a chef, I can call up a distributor right now and buy tilapia for $2.50 a pound, or I can buy it for $9 a pound. Massive difference in what a chef is buying. So most chefs are geared towards that $2.50, $3 a pound tilapia because you, the consumer, aren't willing to pay, and we're all guilty of it, we're not willing to pay $30 for tilapia on a plate. Look, tilapia is a cheap fish, right? So the industry is just now, the consumer demand, everybody's just now saying, well, chefs say, well, why should I spend more money when I don't have to? It's about me being cheaper than the restaurant down the street. And in the grocery store, I mean, I've been guilty of going to one grocery store years ago because it was 50 cents cheaper for one product than another product, and I was already in the one grocery store. Now I know my time is more valuable than running around for 50 cents or $2 or even $20. Okay, eat this instead. Domestically.
Go back to the cat. You don't have to go back there. Just what's the answer on catfish? I heard what.
Here's the answer. Here's the answer. Okay. Stick with domestically farmed catfish. Okay. That's your answer, domestically farmed catfish. So when you go to the store and you look at catfish, there's going to be a big price difference between domestically farmed and the Chinese or the Vietnamese. There's probably about a 30-40% difference in cost versus the two, easily. So domestic is much, much better. That's what you're going to want to eat instead.
Even though it doesn't have to travel as far, it still has a higher cost.
Still, yep. This is a. You think that things travel, that things are lower cost. Most calamari producers, most calamari processors in the U.S. ship their calamari from Rhode Island to China, and process it in China and ship it back to you. It's cheaper for them to do that than have American workforce here. There's only a small handful of American calamari processors left. So what happens is Town Dock, Ruger's, they catch, these are the two big guys that sell to all the restaurants. They catch, in the US, what they catch, they ship it to China and it's mixed in with the Chinese catch. And if you look very carefully, in the last 10 years, both companies have switched and they don't have a 100% domestically caught product anymore. So it's tricky. Ruger's has a red label and a blue label for chefs. And it was always, the blue label was domestic and the red label was imported. Now it says nothing about its origin, about being American anymore. So it's cheaper to use a Chinese workforce. In the garment world, Chinese workers work for 55 cents an hour. Vietnamese, Indonesians, they work for 18 cents an hour. U.S. garment workers, $29 an hour. So there's a considerable savings when you're processing thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of product. U.S. chicken producers, now ship to China and get it packed, processed in China and ship it back.
Okay, but you're saving money on the workforce, but they probably don't have the regulations.
They
in
don't.
terms of health standards.
They don't. They don't. They sure don't. Which is a major issue. So, avoid added chemicals in seafood. I've seen frozen catfish, American, that do have chemicals and some that don't have chemicals. So it's just what you're looking for and what's out there. Because this is just generalities that we're talking about. This is just a generality of an industry. So don't think, oh, all American catfish is. You just have to be a conscious consumer. And do a little bit of research yourself. And let's look at the label and say, hey, what's in here? So, and if you go to a restaurant, you ask them, most restaurants just say whatever you want to hear. We went to a restaurant, my wife and I, she was avoiding soy at the time. She had an allergy, she had a skin rash, and we were trying to pinpoint what it was from. So she was avoiding all soy. We went to a restaurant and we said to them, it was a nice French restaurant, very nice French restaurant, expensive restaurant. And we're saying we're avoiding soy, and the waiter goes, oh, we use olive oil for everything. I said, the salad dressing, oh, it's olive oil. I said, and I asked him, he goes, oh, no, we cook in olive oil. I grabbed him and I said, listen, if she gets soy oil, I said, she's going to start itching like this. Oh, let me go check. Comes back, he goes, I am so sorry. I said, what? He goes, we use soy oil. For everything. Everything. I said, what happened to that olive oil? He goes, I thought we used olive oil. You just have to be very firm with them and say, listen, I'm going to have a reaction. And that's ultimately what you have to do if you care about your health and what you're concerned about eating. So you have to say, hey, I want to order the catfish. I want to make sure it's American, and I really want to make sure there's no chemicals in it, or I'm going to have a reaction. Or you can blame your nutritionist. Say, my nutritionist says I can only eat this.
I've been with people who ordered fish, and they give it the sniff test, and then they give it the smell test. First they ask, is it fresh? And of course they're going to say yes.
Right.
And then they have sent it back and said, I refuse to eat this. Can you do that in your restaurant? When you say it's not fresh? Or it has been frozen? Now you're saying frozen's probably better.
Frozen's better. And I'm happy to explain to a guest, hey, we have frozen and here's what it was caught. And most restaurants are like, no. And here's the one thing right now. Wild salmon is out of season. You cannot get wild salmon. It's not available, fresh, non-frozen. So if you go to a restaurant and they say they have wild salmon, ask them, was it previously frozen? Because really if you're asking them it's fresh, it's all fresh, right? Because opposite of fresh is rotten. You say, was it previously frozen? If they say no, then you're saying, well, I'm not eating wild salmon, I'm eating farm salmon. Because they're not catching in Alaska right now. The season's shut down. Very, very rarely do they have a day break where they can go out and get ocean caught fish. But it's not getting it to New York. It might get to New York City, it might get to Napa, but it's not making it many places at that point. It's super expensive. And a lot of it stays in Alaska if they happen to go out and catch anything during the winter. But a season's not officially opened. Fish number 2, caviar. Why it's bad. Caviar is from beluga and wild-caught caviar from beluga and wild-caught sturgeon are susceptible to overfishing. Sturgeon is really a huge issue for this. Species are also being threatened by an increase in dam building that pollutes the water in which they live in. All forms of caviar come from fish that take a long time to mature, which means it takes for a female population to rebound. Female fish reproduce at age 15. So here you have a fish that takes 15 years to reproduce, and they're harvesting it and taking the eggs, maybe before it can reproduce. So caviar and sturgeon both fall into this. The good news is there are farmed raised sturgeon. I love sturgeon. Sturgeon's a delicious fish, but I stopped serving sturgeon years ago. And there's a farm in California that does raise it. Eat this instead. If you really love caviar, opt for caviar from farmed sturgeon. Fish are harvested at years of age. Selected females are kept much longer for caviar. No hormones and tightly regulated farming methods. The one farm I know is in California that I've personally used before. And you can actually buy caviar from farmed sturgeon. And it's not as much as the other caviar. Atlantic cod. There's stories of when Columbus came to America that you could basically walk across the ocean on cod. That's how plentiful cod was. Why it's bad? Because Atlantic cod stocks collapsed in the mid-1990s, are in such disarray, and the species are now listed one step above the endangered list. Just one step above. But it's a huge economy in the Northeast. So there's a lot of resistance. You know, a lot of people out there don't really think sustainability, and they think, you know, well, this is what I need to do to put a living on my plate today. And, you know, in 15 years, I'm not going to be fishing here. This is a reality of a lot of people's mindsets. So there's a huge, like I said, it's all an economy. It's all people's livelihood. Eat this instead. There is still a cod that you can eat. It's Pacific cod. Stocks are very strong and are in favorite in all these seafood advocacy groups. Pacific cod is typically available frozen. I like Pacific cod. It's not as thick of a cod, but you can go to the frozen department at a lot of seafood stores and buy good, high-quality Pacific cod. And it's about, for me, for the cod that we were to buy, probably about half, not about half the price of other cod, but it's a significant 20, 30% lower priced than Atlantic cod. When you do see cod in the store, if you go to the supermarket and you see fresh cod, a lot of the Northeast cod comes from the Georges Bank. Georges Bank was that place, what was it, The Perfect Storm, that movie, where they go out and fish, right? So here's a good story about the fish that last 21 days. So to fish at Georges Bank, when you leave Boston or Gloucester, those boats travel for 14 days. They don't start catching fish until 2 days into the trip. And they circle the whole Georges Bank and they catch. So every day the fish are caught and logged for that day and packed on ice. When the boat gets back to Gloucester, to the market, to the auction, now this boat has fish that's 10 days old and 2 days old. Same fish, different catch days, major price difference. Massive price difference. The 10-day-old is very price sensitive and it's priced to move. And when you go to a grocery store and you see cheap cod, that's your cheap cod. When a high-end restaurant wants to buy good, high-quality cod, they're getting what's called top of the trip catch. So, same cod, same catch method, same area, different days. Number 4, American eel. Unagi. I used to love unagi sushi. I haven't had it in years. But this is American eel. This is the unagi. Highly contaminated, contaminated with PCBs and mercury. Fishers are also suffering from pollution and over-harvesting. Eat this instead. If you like the taste of eel, opt for Atlantic or Pacific caught squid. Be careful, most calamari on the market is from Asia. Even if it's caught in the US, it's most likely shipped to China for packing. And American mix is often mixed with the Chinese. So the West Coast has a good calamari catch, and so does the East Coast. We use a company called Sea Fresh out of Point Judith, and they package their calamari under a label called the Right Choice Calamari, meaning sustainable catch, high population counts, and 100% chemical free and 100% American processed here in America in Point Judith. That's the one that we use.
What was the name of that again?
It's called Sea Fresh. The brand, their trade brand is called the Right Choice. The Right Choice Calamari. It's twice the price of everything else, but it's obviously not even comparable. Number 5, Asian shrimp. Who like
Frozen? I'm sorry.
frozen, typically frozen.
Can you get that in like ShopRite or not?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go take a look. Some of these fish I know you can buy. Since the problem is the stores are so price sensitive, and ShopRite's in competitive with Stop and Shop, and they're competitive with Hannaford's, and so they dial in on these price points. And unless they have a little specialty shelf or something, a little specialty niche market there, they think they're going to get they typically don't bring it in. So now salmon is one of those things that yeah, the grocery stores will have a wild salmon because consumers want wild salmon, so they bring it in frozen, and they know how to buy it at the right time of the year or the right price. You know, believe it or not, McDonald's, they do that lobster roll in the Northeast. They're actually using real lobster. Real lobster. I did some research, and I had somebody from NBC News in Boston call me, and they wanted to do a whole analysis and try to figure out what they were using. And I did a bunch of research. They're using real lobster, but it's lobster scraps. So they go to the lobster producer in Chicago, the big company in Chicago, and say, anything you normally can't sell, just package it for us. And they put one claw in there. If you notice, if you see the ads, there is one claw in there. But everything else is like such small pieces and this and that. But it's 100% real North American lobster. So the ads are right, and you can't knock them for it. So they're probably creating, I mean, in a good way, they're creating a market out of lesser used pieces or scraps. But in a bad way, a smaller family-owned restaurant in the Northeast in the summertime, their lobster roll is going to be $20 as opposed to a $9.99 lobster roll. And people are saying, well, why would I buy it from this other restaurant, not knowing that the other restaurant's buying better quality or higher grading of lobster meat, or maybe buying whole lobster and cracking it and doing it themselves. So who eats shrimp? Who likes shrimp? You had good shrimp last night. So it's shocking. I love shrimp, but I never eat shrimp out. I would have to say over 90% of the shrimp out is either Asian, Gulf of Mexico wild. After the BP oil spill, I avoid it. I avoid it. I avoid it for myself. I avoid anything from the Gulf of Mexico. Can you find groups out there that say it's totally safe? 100%. Don't forget, it's a massive industry down there.
But for someone that knows nothing, if I go into Walmart and buy shrimp, how do I know whether it's...
First mistake, Walmart.
Okay. Where else?
Costco. Costco sells an organic shrimp.
Sam's.
Okay.
Oh, is that right?
Costco sells an organic shrimp. So Sam's, I don't know what's in Sam's. We should do like a tour of a grocery store for one of these, right? And walk in and go through. Adams has a great seafood program. Adams really does. A lot of the seafood vendors that we buy from, that I source from, and I ask them who else they sell to, because I always ask, who else do you sell to? 9 out of 10 times they go, oh, we go to Adams in Newburgh, we go to Adams. And so Adams is very conscious. Whole Foods is conscious, right? But again, it's an industry, and they rely upon making money off of farm salmon. So they're going to give you information that proves there's certain farm salmon that are sustainable and good. And we're going to talk about salmon. So there's a great documentary out there that some grad students did from Oregon or Washington on Chinese shrimp farms. The people that work there, the employees that work there get sick. The people in the community get sick. The people in the community never benefit financially from these shrimp farms. They're all owned by these big corporations. The money never stays in the community. It's sort of like how salmon's farmed in Canada. The community doesn't benefit, and the community gets polluted on. And it's some nasty chemicals go into the shrimp. And you can tell the texture. If you're a shrimp aficionado, you can actually tell the difference between these black tiger shrimp from Asia. So again, less than 2% of all seafood is inspected. Wild-caught shrimp, or Asian shrimp, wild-caught shrimp. Okay, shrimp's a big topic here. Wild-caught shrimp, why it's bad. We talked about trawling, dredging the bottom of the ocean, bycatch issues. Now, not every shrimp has those kind of drastic bycatch issues, but at one point they were saying between 7 and 15 pounds of unwanted catch are per 1 pound of shrimp, which is why it makes it attractive to have farmed shrimp. Farmed shrimp has no habitat destruction, which it does because the pollution, and wild shrimp has no bycatch, which it really doesn't have a bycatch because they're catching from the farm, harvesting from the farm. We talked about all that, raking coral, it's been documented up to 15 pounds. And then of course, people talk about the BP oil spill. BP oil spill is nothing compared to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Has anybody heard of the dead zone? They don't hear much about it. It's not The dead zone grows each year far worse than the BP oil spill ever was. All the agriculture that comes out of the Mississippi Delta, all the massive beef farms, the hog farms, all of that, a lot of the excrement, a lot of the chemicals get dumped into the Mississippi Delta, into the river, and down into the Gulf of Mexico. And it's a whole massive square, I mean, hundreds of thousands of square miles, 200,000 square miles, something ridiculous, that life's not supported there. It's just the whole dumping ground of the whole all those Midwestern states. So, of course, the Gulf of Mexico is, there's no life in the dead zone. It's like the bottom of a salmon farm. Nothing can live there for a couple kilometers outside of a salmon farm. Nothing can live there. The excrement is just, in a salmon farm, it's so hot, 6 feet high on the salmon farms. So, the issue with wild shrimp is habitat destruction, bycatch, pollution, all out of the Gulf of Mexico. The west coast of Mexico has done a great job in shrimp farming. They've bucked the industry. They saw what China did, Asia did, and they're much cleaner operations. Ocean Garden has gone in there and contracted some farms out. Ocean Garden's a big brand, and they've done the right thing. They've done a much better option. But of course, Ocean Garden shrimp to chefs are a lot of money. So, South America does a great job. Ecuador, Peru, both those countries said, we see the mess that Asia's happened in Asia, and right from the get-go, the government stepped in and said, no, you need certain standards. You need standards on density, you need standards on hormones, antibiotics, on all this kind of stuff. So anything from Peru or anything from Ecuador are typically a lot better. So if you're going to do shrimp, those are what I suggest. The best shrimp to eat. The single one, little salad shrimp, you know those little salad shrimp, the pink shrimp? Those are caught from cold waters, Maine, Oregon, both sides. And those are really clean shrimp. Make sure if you're buying those, you buy a brand that is chemical free, because sometimes they will load chemicals in them as a preservative or plump them up. But those are really awesome. Alaskan spot prawns are bigger shrimp. They come from Alaska. They're in season every September. Most likely you will find them frozen. And most likely you're only going to find them around once or twice. They're going to be about $25 a pound, maybe with the head still on. It's a closer shrimp to lobster. Texture-wise, taste-wise, it is a shrimp, and they are awesome. I would suggest looking for them, and if you find them, buy them. It's an experience. Alaskan spot prawns. A lot of them come with the roe on the outside. So if you're French and you like to eat roe, go for it. Any questions on shrimp? Because shrimp is such a widely eaten seafood. Atlantic flatfish, why it's bad. This group of fish includes flounder, sole, and halibut, all caught off the Atlantic coast. They found their way on the list because of heavy contamination and overfishing that dates back to the 1800s. According to Food and Water Watch, populations of these fish are as low as 1% of what's necessary to be considered for long-term fishing. Halibut, there's East Coast and West Coast. You always want West Coast halibut, Alaska. Anything that's from Alaska, seafood, when I say let's do seafood for dummies, Alaska is it. In their constitution is sustainability. That's their constitution. Everything caught in Alaska is highly quoted. They're very conscious on everything they do. You see caught in Alaska, that's your seal of approval right there. They're super strict. Now, again, with the processing in China, you can get Alaskan salmon caught in Alaska, processed in China. Alaskan king crab, processed in China. You have to look at the label, because they have to say where they're processing. There's by law, they have to do origins. So they will say where it's coming from if you read the fine print. But when you buy king crab, there's a reason why there's one that's $20 a pound and one that's $26 a pound. You're paying $6 extra to process it in America. It's typically
it'll say right on the label.
It'll say right on the label, yes.
Processing chain, China. Or
Yes, it'll say product, and then but somewhere else it might say processed on a different part of the label. It will say. Now, when you go past the Aleutian Islands, you go into Russian water, they decimate king crab. They just overfish it and overfish it and overfish it like crazy. It's nothing like buying Alaskan king crab. So even though it's the same region, you're only a few miles apart, and totally different quotas, totally different standards. So back to flatfish. Population, sole, flounder, halibut. Eat this instead, Pacific halibut. I just talked about all that strict quotas and everything. Pacific halibut is a seasonal fish. You won't be able to get it this time of the year, not previously frozen. But again, if you go to a health food store, I always tell people, where do I buy fish? Go to a health food store. Go to a health food store and buy fish. Whole Foods is a great start. A smaller independent, that like Mother Earth. What's the place in Middletown and Fishkill? Nature's Pantry, things like that. They'll have a good handle on. It's just like coming to my restaurant. I have a good handle on this kind of stuff. They're going to have a good handle on this kind of stuff.
How about that health food store that's in New Paltz?
Yes. Health and Nutrition.
Yes.
Do they have frozen fish there? I don't know. I'll stop in next time.
Once, 'cause I heard it was good.
Yeah, it's good.
Great produce.
They do it. They have really good stuff. They have really good stuff. Yeah. Angela's a customer of the restaurant. Really, I forgot about them. Number 7. Here it is, the big one, salmon. We could talk for 3-4 hours. I could talk for 3-4 hours on salmon. Why it's bad. Atlantic salmon. It's actually illegal to capture wild Atlantic salmon because fish stocks are so low, and in part because of farm salmon. So there are a few areas where you can catch salmon through the St. Lawrence River and stuff like that. But we're talking about commercially catching. You cannot commercially catch, just like striped sea bass. You cannot commercially catch striped sea bass. They're out there with a sport license fishing sea bass, and then they're allowed to sell it into the restaurant world. Distribution. Salmon, you're not allowed. As a restaurateur, I'm not allowed to serve wild Atlantic salmon. It's illegal. It doesn't happen. A friend of mine last night went to a restaurant in Newburgh. Oh, this new restaurant, it's great, the steakhouse. I had the wild Atlantic salmon. I said, no, you didn't. Oh, no, yeah, I did. It's on the menu. Looked up online, it says Atlantic salmon wild caught. As soon as you see the word Atlantic salmon, as soon as you see the word Atlantic, it's always 100% farmed in a restaurant. That's the bottom line. If you're in Scotland, there's one river in Scotland that allows 57 tons of salmon caught a year. If it got to the US, it'd be $30 a pound wholesale, whole fish. I've seen it, it's been here. I've inquired about it. It's super expensive. It's not, your average restaurant would not be serving it. As I was saying earlier before we were starting, I was saying that you give me 10 minutes and I'll go into a grocery store locally here and buy counterfeit wild salmon. I'll go to a restaurant within a half a mile from here and get counterfeit wild salmon. A lot of restaurants, they're going to swear it's wild, it's farmed, they're going to swear it's wild. They're going to swear up and down in their life that it's wild. And if you send it to a lab, it wouldn't be.
Because they don't even know? They don't even know?
Because they don't know, they don't care to know, or they know that wild is so much better. And they just think, if you go to my website, foodfraudtv.com, I have conversations with very famous restaurateurs, very famous chefs from the city that swear they're serving wild Atlantic salmon. I have one Michelin star chef, and she's on TV. She has her own show. She's her own show. Her chef is telling me that they pay cash under the table to a lady who gets some wild Atlantic salmon. This lady has a Michelin star and she has her own TV show. The most famous Greek chef in New York City has told me that she eats wild Atlantic salmon every day. And then I'm clueless, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And all of her salmon she sells is wild Atlantic salmon. People think because they're from the ocean, and if you go onto a website, if you go onto like the Faroe Islands or British Columbia, you go onto those salmon farm websites, they show pristine pictures of salmon farms in the wild. And they always market them as raised in the wild. It's very common, raised in the wild. They're being farm raised in the, we have to of course farm raised in the ocean. Even my mom is confused about this. She heard me talk about this for 10, 15 years. She's still confused. But it's from the ocean. Well, of course it's from the ocean. That's where the farm is. The farm is in the ocean. Well, why is it not wild then? Well, because they're controlling it. And so people don't get that concept that, yeah, you have to, I said, Mom, you have to raise it somewhere. Where are you going to raise it? On a football field, in a bathtub? It's good if they're in the ocean. That's where you put salmon farms, which is the problem with salmon farms. They're in the ocean. So let's dive.
How big are the pens?
Size of a football field. Usually round, typically round. So salmon farming is very polluting. Thousands of fish are crammed into pens, which leads to the growth of disease, parasites that require antibiotics and pesticides. Often the fish escape and compete with native fish for food, leading to declines in native population. The U.S. government is also, USDA is also moving ahead, which I think it has approved, genetically engineered salmon. I think that was old. Oh, they are moving ahead on approving it. So let's talk about salmon. Salmon's a really good topic. First of all, the industry is a bad in the hole because it takes 3 pounds of wild fish, wild protein, other protein, to make 1 pound of salmon. So you're at a net deficit right off the bat. That's, if you're concerned about the world's food supply and enough food, then salmon would not be the fish to be eating because it's taking. Now in Norway, they go right to the Baltic Sea and they just harvest all the fish out of the Baltic Sea. And the Baltic Sea is not that clean of a sea. Then it goes to a processing plant, it gets ground up, it gets stabilized with chemicals, carcinogens, gets then dyed or whatever with a synthetic pigment, not the natural pigment that the wild salmon eat. So you take this food and then you feed it to these fish. Now, the European Union, the salmon farmers in the European Union, and they're all big companies. Salmon farming starting in Norway in the 60s. And by the 70s, by the mid 70s, the Norwegian government was like, man, you guys are screwing the environment. This isn't right. So they kind of tightened the regulations on them. So what did these big companies do? They went to countries where they can just basically run rampant and do what they want. In Canada, when they have to kill fish for disease in Canadian fish farms, the Canadian government pays 100% retail price to that farm, to this massive Norwegian company. Full retail value. They don't need insurance for fish deaths, for outbreaks. The government pays for everything, full retail price. These poor villages and towns, they can't get a librarian, and the government's handing over millions of dollars to these seafood companies that are big, massive companies like Marine Harvest. These are all Norwegian-based companies. So they struck a deal right in the beginning that Canada thinks this is going to provide so many jobs and it's going to boost the economy and this and that. So they don't have to take care. They don't have to not have disease. It is impossible to raise salmon without having disease. Impossible. It can't be done. When you pack fish, 2 fish per bathtub, and they swim on top of each other all day, and the excrement and the disease, you're going to get disease. It's going to happen. Now, certain salmon farms say, oh, we have low density. We've adapted low density standards. That means 1 fish per bathtub instead of 2 per bathtub. But that's what they consider. Now, who regulates this terminology? Well, they do. In the organic world, if you see organic salmon, totally self-regulated. There is no USDA label for organic salmon. It's all self-regulated. So it's what they consider their standards are to be organic. Canada, they tried to adopt organic standards and they wanted to include genetically engineered fish in it. So even if it does come to fruition here in the US, again, there's chlorine in chicken because that's part of the game. They're going to make the standards work so that big players can play the game. That's how it always works. 2 people that I've gotten to know over the years are Arnie and Ron Koss. Arnie and Ronnie started the very first organic baby food company. And they were the first new baby food brand in 40 years in the US. They started in the 70s. And they were going to compete with Gerber. Gerber's conventional product. And they were making Earth's Best. And they were going right on the shelf. First organic and probably the only organic product still to launch mainstream before they went into a health food store. They went right mainstream, right to compete with Gerber. It took them 5-6 years to get this off the ground. I just saw them this summer again. They were through the Ellenville area. And they've written a book called I believe it's Earth's Best. And they told me in depth, I have a good interview with them on my YouTube channel, on the problems of the organic industry. And they said, Marcus, no matter what we did, we could do a lot better than the organic certifications, and we always did. He goes, we tested every single batch of carrots that came in. He goes, I couldn't tell you how many batches of carrots we sent back that other baby food companies were taking in because secondary testing each product wasn't required. He goes, all that's not required. He goes, if they had to test every product, you wouldn't have an organic industry. If you couldn't put chlorine on chicken, you wouldn't have an organic chicken industry. Those wouldn't exist. So you always have to think, they got to make the game playable. So to make the game playable with fish, with salmon, these salmon farms went to the European Union and they lobbied so heavily that now pork byproducts and chicken byproducts can now go into salmon feed in Europe. So Norwegian salmon, Scottish salmon, Faroe Island salmon can all contain pork byproducts. So of course the first question is it still kosher? That's a whole nother topic. So they're in this desperate struggle to keep this cheap source of protein coming in to feed the fish. A company in South America, in Chile, Verlasso got these super high standard ratings from Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. They're like the top-rated salmon farm in the world. So I said, well, what is up with this? What is so different with this salmon farm than the other salmon farms? So I did my research. I called Verlasso. I called Monterey Bay Aquarium. I spoke to one of the certifiers there. I was on top of this. Turns out they're using genetically modified fungus as the food. So Monterey Bay Aquarium told me, well, they're not out catching wild fish, not depleting the population. So they get the best ranking because they're not depleting a wild stock of protein. But instead, they didn't take into account a genetically modified fungus as their main food of their diet.
What kind of fungus did they modify?
I don't know. I don't know any of that, but that's how they based it. And he couldn't answer any questions for me. He's like, listen, I'm telling you they're not harvesting, and that's it. I don't know the technicalities of that. But that's why they got their rating, because they're. And I know there's other like corn, Quorn is a modified fungus that makes the shelf, and a lot of vegans eat it. So I'm not sure what part they're using, how they're doing it. I'm sure it's not the same quality as the corn label, Quorn. I don't know. If you can find that out, that'd be interesting. I'd like to know. So.
Aren't salmon like don't they words vegetarian basically?
They do.
So when
They
you're
can.
doing
They
pork
can.
and
Yes.
beef byproducts, that's suddenly going against their diet.
Against their diet. So salmon will eat other fish, they'll eat krill, and they'll eat a lot of chlorella. And chlorella and krill is where they get their color from the, and I never pronounce this right, anazathin, which is, yes, the anazathin, which is a pigment. I take chlorella and spirulina every day, and that's the pigment. That's a carotenoid. That's the antioxidant. That's the color. So in the salmon farms, when they decide what color the salmon's going to be, because if you bought salmon before they dyed the flesh, it would be gray and you couldn't sell it. So they basically wheel out this salmon fan, and you pick a color, like going to the Benjamin Moore store and what color you want in your room. The farmers, I want my color of salmon that. So they dial in the feed to do that. Now this anazathin that they use for the feed in the fish farms is typically derived from petroleum-based synthetic. In some cases, it can come from corn or from sugarcane, but in most cases, it's a synthetic derivative of petroleum. So that's how they do it. So they're going to tell you, you go to the salmon farm, oh, our salmon comes from, this anazathin and this and that. In reality, it's not the same that you and I are taking every day and that the wild salmon are eating. So the industry is so, they just basically just say what you want to hear and what most people won't research. A big company, True North Salmon, which a lot of chefs are on this, and a lot of friends of mine that I respected for years because of their strict standards are serving this salmon called True North. And it's a salmon that's owned by Cook Aquaculture, a big company. And they make claims on the website, and Rick Muin, who was from Oceana, who was the big proponent of sustainable seafood for years, is like their corporate chef now. He's on their website. So I went on their website and I was looking up all their graphs. I was looking up all their information. I was like, man, these people are like, wow. And I found this information on there that I called them about. And I said, you guys are posting, you're saying that your fish has low PCBs, low dioxins, and you're comparing. I said, but that graph that you're picking is from true Atlantic salmon that's in the wild, not farmed, which you're feeding it. And they actually removed it off their website because I called them out on it. I said, I'm not the one that should be calling you guys to tell you that you're comparing. You don't have the fish you're saying on your website is not the fish you have. It's two totally different things. It's like grass-fed bison versus farmed bison. They're two totally different things. You can't compare the two, and I can't find it on their website anymore. So I think I put a video up too, calling them out. So I think they've taken it down. But a lot of chefs are on board with this True North salmon, and they have a great publicity. And they hired Rick Moon to come in, and Rick Moon was like, if you want to do sustainable seafood as a young chef apprentice, you looked at Rick Moon because he was like it on sustainable seafood. He was the guy who was doing it, and now he's on their team. So eat this instead, wild Alaskan salmon. Now, of course, people are going to say Fukushima. That's a reality. Of course, you can look at both sides of the story, and you'll find fish farmers that are saying, no, it's not, and you'll find people that are saying, yes, it is. If you're truly concerned about that aspect of the ocean, let's face it, the whole ocean is becoming deteriorated. Our whole ocean is not in good shape. So my suggestion is, if you want to eat good seafood, but eat less of it. It's the reality. It's the reality of what's coming down to. If you want salmon or something similar to salmon, the best choice is Arctic char. Arctic char is farmed in an inland containment system. Salmon are farmed in bays with nets. Arctic char is farmed inland inside of a building. They're in circulating ponds or circulating pools. So if a disease happens, it's not going to spread into the wild. They can control the environment much better. They don't pollute the environment. So the average salmon farm, the excrement of the salmon is equal to a village with a population of 10,000 on a daily basis getting dropped on the bottom of the ocean floor. Every day that's happening in salmon farms. There was a case in Newfoundland 4, 5, 6 years ago. One of the salmon farms had an outbreak in disease, so they doused some chemical out there. All the lobster farmers, not farmers, lobster harvesters, reported the next day that all the lobsters were belly up in the bay. Killed everything out there. So the salmon farms are riddled with disease. They're polluting the ocean. It's a negative gain on protein. The other big issue is they're passing all of the disease onto the wild salmon. And here's why people think automatically, you go to these salmon farm websites, we're save a wild salmon, eat farmed. You know, help the wild salmon by eating farmed. The reality is that most of these farms are placed in the migratory path of wild salmon. British Columbia, Canada, Scotland, Norway. So the salmon are very, I mean, it's amazing that these salmon go back to the same spot that they were born than to spawn and lay eggs. So they know instinctively where they're going back. So they swim up the stream, and they swim past the salmon farms. Well, of course, all the disease is there. The biggest problem is sea lice. Most farms have sea lice. Well, sea lice get killed with fresh water. That's no problem because the salmon swimming into the river and then going upstream, fresh water kills the sea lice. What happens when the baby fry swim past the farm? Sea lice attached to them, and now they're staying in the ocean, salt water. They don't have a fighting chance. So the salmon farms are actually spreading out into the disease into the wild population and killing the wild population. But the industry is fighting so hard to say this is not the case and this is not happening. And you understand why. It's these companies' livelihood. And however, the wild salmon guys are like, our catches are down, our catches are down, our catches are down. I've become friendly with a lady named Alex Morton. Alex Morton is a marine biologist, and she works out of British Columbia. She has a great website. If you go on her stuff, she has some really, really compelling work. She went there to study whales. And years of being there, she noticed a decline of wild salmon, drastic declines of wild salmon in British Columbia. So she has now devoted her work to the salmon. And really I might have an interview with her on my YouTube. If not, her and I are planning on doing some more YouTube videos this year. So she will be on the Aroma Thyme site on my YouTube channel. And she's mortified by what's happening in British Columbia with the salmon farms. And the salmon farms get away with whatever they want. They make the claims and this and that. She's gotten salmon out of the salmon farms and tested them. She's found the disease. She's found the flu strains. And the Canadian government won't admit that everything's there, because once you admit that it's there, then you have problems. So certain diseases you want to keep at bay and not really officially publicize that disease is out there. Another big issue with salmon farms is the net entanglement. You'll have sea lions that get caught, and even whales that'll get caught in the nets. It's open fire for salmon farms to go out and kill sea lions. They have to protect their crop. Salmon's their crop. Sea lions are, a threat to their crop. So they go out and actively shoot them, and they get entangled in the nets and things like that. And whales, Alex Morton, she has on her YouTube channel a whale that was entangled that they had to work with. So Arctic char, raised in a closed containment system. So just looking at salmon as a whole, no matter what anybody tells you that this salmon is great, and Monterey Bay Aquarium is going to tell you this is great, the whole industry as a whole has an issue. There are salmon farms that are doing much better of a job, but again, the industry as a whole is tainted. Imported king crab. I touched upon this briefly. Biggest problem with imported crab from Russia, there's no quotas at all, really. They're just totally decimated. So make sure that your Alaskan king crab is more of a generic trade name to a lot of people. Oh, it's king crab. You automatically assume it's Alaskan. And with that show, Deadliest Catch, that really elevated the king crab. So people just automatically assume, hey, I'm having king crab, and it's automatically from Alaska without even thinking to read, research, look at a label. Eat this instead. Approximately 70% of the king crabs sold in the U.S. are imported. Look for Alaskan king crab. Snow crab. Snow crab is a very sustainable catch. Comes from Alaska. Those are smaller crabs, smaller crab legs, but those come from Canada, and those always get good ratings. The thing about crabs, which makes them another thing that's sustainable, is they're trap caught. So if you can't get other fish in there, something else goes in there, you can dump it out of the trap. It's still alive and it can go back into the ocean, as opposed to being hooked or netted through a trawling system. The fish, the bycatch is still alive, and Alaskan spot prawns, same thing. They're caught in a trap. So whatever's in there just gets thrown back out into the ocean. It's not supposed to be in there. Shark. Why it's bad. These predatory fish are extremely high in mercury, which poses a threat to humans. The ocean ecosystems suffer as well. Less sharks out there create an imbalance. It's just like Chilean sea bass. Is Chilean sea bass on this list? No, Chilean sea bass is not on this list. Chilean sea bass is up there too. Once you start decimating one population, you have problems with other populations. So the Patagonian toothfish is the main source for the whales down in that part of the world, part of the Antarctic. Did you know most Chilean sea bass, the boat goes out for 3 months, 2 months, for months at a time. The fish are automatically frozen. They're frozen for months. So if you ever see Chilean sea bass that's so-called never frozen, they're not FedExing off a boat in the Antarctic to get to New York. So they're depleting. You have a whole domino effect. Once one species is eliminated, all of a sudden you have either a population surge with others or a decline because that's their food source. And shark fin soup. Shark fin soup is terrible. I don't know if anybody's ever seen what happens with shark fin soup. They just harvest the shark that's thin and throw the shark back. Mackerel. Eat Atlantic mackerel instead. I like mackerel. Mackerel's a really tasty fish. Orange roughy. Why it's bad. This is probably one of the highest mercury-laden fish out there. High levels of mercury, because orange roughy takes 20 to 40 years to mature, right? So the longer the fish lives, the more life it has to do contaminants. Like tuna. The larger the tuna is, the longer it's been out there to consume other fish and build that bioconcentration of mercury up. So ideally, when you want small fish of any species that have a shorter life, but at least have reached past that maturity point to reproduce. That's one of the general rules of all the fish.
Did you say mackerel was not good?
Mackerel is good.
Oh.
Mackerel is a good substitute. Mackerel is a substitute for shark. Yeah, I don't even know if Red Lobster still... Oh, Red Lobster refuses to serve it, I was going to say. Red Lobster refuses to serve it, so... Orange Roughy. Orange Roughy. So, eat this instead. Opt for yellow snapper or domestic catfish to get the same texture as Orange Roughy. We still have a lot of people that come in the restaurant that ask for Orange Roughy. It was a popular fish for so long. Tuna, here we go. Tuna is super popular, especially in sushi restaurants. Going back to frozen, certain states like New Jersey, you're not allowed to sell fish that hasn't previously been frozen in sushi. A lot of sushi suppliers sell frozen fish to the sushi restaurants, and then they slack it or thaw it. But it's done that for safety reasons to kill if there's any bacteria in it. They try to kill it through the freezing process. So bacteria is killed through heating or through freezing, through temperature ranges. So won't kill everything, and especially in the case of mad cow disease. Mad cow disease is never, that's so resistant to everything, mad cow disease in cattle. Let's see, so why it's bad. A recent analysis by New York Times found that Atlantic bluefin tuna has the highest levels of mercury of any type of tuna. To top it off, bluefin tuna are severely overharvested to the point of reaching near extinction levels and considered critically endangered by the International Union of Conservation of Nature. So tuna is super popular because restaurants, sushi restaurants, every time you go to get a spicy tuna roll, the tuna rolls, you're most likely having one of these two tunas in there. There's something called white tuna in restaurants. It's not tuna at all. It's escolar. Escolar is a white fish that resembles the texture of tuna, but whenever you go to a sushi restaurant and they say, oh, we have white tuna rolls, it's not tuna. Escolar in a larger portion, 8 ounces, not that much larger, gives some people severe stomach problems. People have been known to have reactions like food poisoning to escolar. So it's not something that you want to really, I've never served escolar because of that. I don't want a customer coming back and saying, your fish made me so sick. In the reality, escolar doesn't agree with certain people. It's one of those fish. And white tuna is escolar. If they know what they're talking about and they want to serve white tuna, it would be albacore. But albacore is not white. It can still come a darker color. Now this is what we serve. It's a line caught albacore tunas. There's 47 different species of tuna. So people might say, oh, black tuna, this tuna, that tuna. There's 47 different species. Albacore has a generic name where any of the lighter fish are considered albacore. But then albacore is actually a species name where it's a specific species. So I'm talking about the specific species of albacore here. We buy fish that are 25 pounds. They're old enough to reproduce, but they're not old enough to bioconcentrate all the harmful mercury. They are caught. The season is only 6 weeks long. And I've talked to the president of the Albacore Association in Washington and Oregon. I think his last name is Hill, John Hill. I spoke with him a few years ago because I was really interested about finding out more about what they do. The season is only 6 weeks. All the fish are caught and frozen immediately on the boat. That's what happens. So our tuna that we get year round is this 6-week tuna that then goes to a sushi distributor. This tuna that we use is sashimi sushi grade. Who's had the tuna? Have you had the tuna? Have you had the tuna?
I think so.
Amazing. It melts in your mouth.
Next time.
We sear it. We leave it raw in the center. It's amazing. But most restaurants don't want albacore tuna because albacore tuna, that trade name comes back up, that generic name, and albacore is like the whiter tuna that's no good. So you never really go to a restaurant and touting they're serving albacore tuna. I tout it because I know the difference. Long Island has a nice albacore catch too, the species of albacore. I've gotten some really nice albacore out of Long Island years ago, and the West Coast will have larger fish. So, and recently we got a hold of some Fijian albacore from Fiji that was really, really good as well. But they were larger fish. They were twice the size, they were maybe 50-pound fish, which is still a small fish. But for our tuna dish at the restaurant, it wasn't the same mouthfeel, it wasn't the same texture. Our tuna, basically melts in your mouth, and it's insane. People love it. It could have its own Facebook page. It's amazing, the tuna. So, talked about all of that. 6 weeks frozen on harvest. Oh, Chilean sea bass is here. Okay, I might have titled this 10 fish, but it's 12 fish. Okay, I think it grows and grows. So, Chilean sea bass. Why it's bad. Most Chilean sea bass is sold in the U.S. It comes from fishermen who have captured them illegally. There are quotas on it. Do you know some Central American companies will export more swordfish than they're allowed to catch? There's a lot of black market fish out there, and Chilean sea bass happens to be that one. Now, if you go on MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council, they will tell you that there's 3 areas of Chilean sea bass that are sustainable, and they're certified as sustainable, which is okay. But the problem is, you as a consumer don't know that, and most chefs say, well, it's sustainable because 3 areas are certified sustainable, 3 catch areas, but the other 55 catch areas, or how many other catch areas, aren't certified. So it becomes really confusing to what is and what isn't. So a long time ago when they decided to do that, I said, well, I'm not going to still not touch it. It's confusing. I don't want you to come to my restaurant, you knowing that I'm dedicated to serving sustainable seafood and clean food and this and that. And Marcus is serving Chilean sea bass, so it must be okay. I think that'd be giving off the wrong signal if I were to do that. Just like if I found a great farm salmon that said, oh, wow, this is a great farm salmon, I'm going to serve it. You're going to come and say, oh, well, Marcus is serving it. Just like chefs are saying, well, Rick Moon's endorsing this salmon, so why isn't it any good? He wrote the book on sustainable seafood. Why is this not any good, right? So the confusion, it's too much confusion. So I just say stay away from it altogether. Let all the populations increase. And eat this instead. Haddock. Haddock is the closest thing, hook and line caught haddock or East Coast striped bass. East Coast striped bass is delicious. I love it. It's a beautiful fish. Again, it is sport caught, so there's no issues. When something is line caught, there's no issues with bycatch, because when you get another fish on the hook and you bring it in, you can let it go and get back in the ocean. When you long line catch, it's not as easy. When you net catch, it's not easy because it's there in the nets. Now, certain salmon are caught in Alaska with a hook and line, or they're called troll caught, where they're waiting at the mouth of the ocean for the king salmon or whatever salmon to swim in, and they snag them with a hook. Certain salmon are net caught. And if you go to a good seafood store and they have whole salmon there, the easiest way to tell if something's line caught or net caught is if it's had its head on. If it has its head on, it's hook caught. If they're net caught, what happens is the holes are only so big, and they're gill nets typically. The fish swim in, get caught into the gill net, and then tries to back out and can't back out. So they sit there for hours, flapping, backing out. So the head's not presentable. In fact, not much of certain of those fish are presentable when they're net caught like that. So they might be Alaskan, they might have to be sustainable, they might have all the nods, but the fish was in a net for hours, beating itself up. So as a general rule, I avoid netted fish from Alaska, or netted salmon from Alaska. Certain other nets are safer, where they'll scoop up and catch everything, but the gill nets are a popular way to catch salmon. So when you go to a store and you see Alaskan wild salmon, and it's $10 a pound or $14 a pound, you're probably dealing with a gill net versus a line caught. So that's the difference. So if you're buying from the Yukon River, I believe the whole Yukon River nets their fish. Fantastic fish. Amazing story of the Yukon River. The native people own all the rights to the seafood there. It's not owned by big companies. I've spoken to these people. I've met these people at trade shows in Boston at the seafood show. Everything that comes out of there is typically netted, is what they tell me. They don't really... She went onto my website and she goes, Marcus, I got to tell you right now, our stuff is netted, and I know you don't like netted because I was on your website looking at what you buy. So just keep buying what you're buying. So, but Yukon River king salmon, if you can ever get it, is a treat. It is the Kobe beef of the salmon world. Salmon instinctually know where they're going back to what river, and by the length of the river determines how much fat that salmon will pack on. Copper River is 300 miles. The Stakine and Toku rivers are 400 miles, 500 miles. The Yukon River is 2,300 miles long. So when the salmon enters the mouth of the river, they stop eating, which is why they say that shad is safe when it swims into the Hudson, because it's migrating and it's going to spawn, and they don't eat anymore, so they're not consuming toxins. Even though they're swimming in the toxins, they're not consuming them. It's an industry, right? They got to sell it, right? So, so the salmon knows they need that much fat for the journey, because the salmon stops eating at the mouth of the river and now is in spawning mode and swims upstream. And the longer they swim, the more fat reserves they need. So that's why most salmon are caught at the mouth of the river. That's the prime peak of the fatness, prime peak of the season of the salmon. Once the salmon starts swimming upstream, some companies will still catch them. The natives will never eat salmon that swims upstream. They call it spent fish, because the fish is eating its own fat content and depleting it, and they don't consider that a viable food for them. But sometimes I'll see like cheaper, like Copper River salmon, like in August, end of August, and I know it's not mouth of the river Copper River salmon. I know it's caught upstream or wherever they're catching it from. You can tell right by the price a lot of times. I can tell by the price because of years of doing it. So, I hope this wasn't that confusing or depressing.
It was a little depressing. I gotta say though, we really like sushi, and now I'm scared to go anywhere and eat sushi.
I love sushi, and I eat the avocado roll and the sweet potato roll. Is what I eat now. I love going for sushi. I would go today. I would go there right now. Now he says he has. He says he has wild salmon. He doesn't have wild salmon.
But even the eel,
the eel, the unagi, I know, and I love sushi. Every now and then I'll have a tuna roll. Every now and then I'll have a tuna roll. The crabs coming from Asia. The spider rolls, all those crabs come from Asia. See, I buy from two of the seafood companies, JFC and True World, that sells to all of this, and they sell to every sushi restaurant. True World Foods doesn't even have an American-speaking workforce. The salespeople. I have one person that I deal with, and there was one lady who spoke English years ago, and she quit, and I was like, how do I talk to these people? But they have like 2 or 3 products that I want, like the albacore tuna, which comes through the sushi distributor. So yeah, it's tough sometimes to go out. My kids and we stick to avocado and cucumber and sweet potato rolls. We do the albacore tuna. We do it sashimi style. So it's served seared super hard and left raw in the center. Which I should do a cooking class demo with that one time. That would be really good. So what I did here today, I can do anywhere. So if someone wants me to come to the gym to do something, gyms are like this a lot. I can talk about anything. I even have portable cooking units that we can do a little demo and stuff like that. I brought macaroons for everybody to have macaroons today. Those macaroons are for sale, by the way, so if anybody wants them, they're $10.99 a dozen, $11 a dozen. They're shelf stable, all 100% organic ingredients, dairy-free, gluten-free. They're not even baked, they're dehydrated at a low temperature to keep the enzyme activity in the coconut. The coconut's raw. The chocolate's not quite raw, it's small stack fermentation. 95 degrees, but once they start grinding it, the mechanism heats up and it goes above the enzyme temperature threshold. But it's a super, super clean product. So I do have those today, but I can do all kinds of demos and stuff, and I just like getting in front of people and talking about what we do.
Do you do a beef thing too?
I can do a beef thing too, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What was that question?
Something.
Talk about beef.
Talk about beef.
Like you talked about fish.
Yeah, I can do a talk about beef. Yeah.
How long to travel?
Depends how many people I can get in front of, and it depends. Like a talk like this, like I'm happy because it's in my area, so I don't charge for something like this because I'm going to gain clients and I can make a good YouTube video and get that online and do more exposure. If I had to go to New York City or something, I'd need some kind of compensation just to get, because that's not my travel expense, it's not my client. But if there's 100 people there and they're going to buy 100 bags of macaroons, yeah, let's do it.
I eat tuna fish, canned tuna fish for lunch a lot.
You're going to want to go to the store and buy, there's a couple different brands out there now.
A great brand, and it was line caught.
Line caught, and you got the good one. Oh, I know that we've used it. We buy it in pouches. I know the name too. There's several of them out there now. Last year at a food show, an organic food show we went to last year, there was 6, 7 brands of tuna that you can trace where the tuna comes from, where it's caught.
Caught or something as well.
It's line caught. It's the same tuna that we're using in our tuna dish, but they're now canning it. And they do sardines in a can. They do mackerel.
One I found, I had a gold packet, and I can't find it anymore, but it was line caught.
Yeah.
But water or oil, like I usually get water.
I would do water because
Sometimes it says you don't even have to drain it.
because you don't know what kind of oil's in it, right? Oil, the typical problem with oil in restaurants and oil you buy in the store is it's loaded with hexane. Hexane is a solvent, petroleum solvent, to extract. So if you're taking sunflower seeds or canola or whatever you're extracting, you mechanically extract it. You can only get so much. Well, if you douse it with hexane gas, it extracts much more. So there is oil. Most oils out there they've used hexane gas in it to extract, and it's something I don't want to use. I stay away from. So when you buy oil, you want to use for something that's expeller pressed. Expeller pressed is the key terminology for buying oil. So I don't know if they're using expeller pressed oil, GMO oil now, soy oil, canola oil. I mean, I'd stick with water.
So if it says line caught,
You're good. Line caught is typically much better. Typically much better because you have to look at like the whole Asian fish market. If they're out there catching, a lot of it's it's netted. They'll catch. I mean, even like you can get like Asian like red snapper. It's all netted. It's all everything in the nets, and is some of it good? Yeah. Some of it bad? Yeah. Is most of it not good? Yeah.
I might have it in my pictures because I took a picture of it when I was at the grocery store.
Yeah. I wish I knew the name that we've used forever. I use it at the camp that we do in the summertime for tuna. It's a great product.
Aren't hexanes non-polar though? So if you put them in water, they'll separate.
Technically, I think, right?
Yeah.
So in water, but not in oil, though.
Right, because
Yeah.
Oil is non-polar.
Right.
It
Yeah.
mixes with water.
Never mixes, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, science major.
Yeah, yeah.
Drain really well.
Well, you're not going to have, we're talking about tuna fish that had water. I do the water versus the oil. 'Cause you don't know what's in the oil. Genetically modified oil, cheap oil, cottonseed oil. Might say, if it says olive oil, but you can still extract the olive oil with hexane. You have to buy extra virgin. We went, on our last trip to Italy, we visited about 10 olive oil producers. For a little bottle of olive oil, a good producer, a decent producer, it costs them €5 to put it in the bottle. To actually put it in the bottle, that's, by the time it hits the shelf in America, that's a $25 bottle of oil. Most people want to spend $20 for a gallon, right? That's not edible, that stuff. You don't want to, and here's the biggest thing, you never want to cook with olive oil. Cooking with olive oil is a no-no. It's such a volatile oil that coconut's much better. The bottom line is any oil you cook with, you're gonna rupture the oil, you're gonna damage oil at some point. So there's no safe oil. There's better oils, better heat-resistant oils. And if oil ever smokes, if you get to the smoking point, ditch it. Get rid of it. You don't even want to have that near your food. Oil that's at the smoking point. Sunflower oil turns darker quicker, but it lasts longer for some reason. I'm not sure why. We use local sunflower oil like to pan, if we need to pan fry something. And it turns blacker quicker, but for some reason it lasts longer. But it's $110 for a 5-gallon pail as opposed to the oil that most restaurants pay $17 for fryer oil. $30 if they want a high-end fryer oil, right? With all the GMOs and hexanes and all that. So,
So why is olive
say-
oil not good to cook with?
it's too volatile. It's like imagine like flax oil. Imagine going to the grocery store or the health food store and buying super high quality flax oil that's in a dark container and then putting it in a pan to cook with it. You'd kill all the nutrients in it. Olives are fruit. Is a fruit, so they're rich in polyphenols. It's a healthy food, or supposed to be. Whoever research you're looking at, because now a lot of people are saying, well, it's processed, and it is processed. You're extracting the fiber and the enzymes from, the oil from the fiber and the enzymes. So yeah, it is not. It is a processed food, but it's so volatile that It's not. You want to keep it cold, free of light, free of air. Olive oil. You know, don't keep it out on the counter and with the cap open, or keep it in the refrigerator airtight. Yep.
So
Yep.
I'm just better off using my copper chef pans and I don't use any oil.
Don't use any oil. I don't cook with oil with myself. I don't. I try not to. If I do, it's a very small amount. Yeah. Because again, it's a process. Oil is a processed food. And no matter how healthy they say olive oil is, it's still processed. It's a processed food. There's certain doctors like Dr. Clapper, Dr. Greger, Dr. Furman. I don't know if Dean Ornish is on the bandwagon. I think he is. These are all highly successful cardiologists, heart doctors, and they say no oil. They say no oil to all those doctors. And who's the other doctor? Dr. Not Graham. There's a potato doctor. This is interesting. You should read this. It's I can picture him. He has a starch solution. His book is called The Starch Solution, and he preaches no oil whatsoever as well. And these are all highly successful heart doctors. And no oil, it's processed. It is, when you think about it, it's a processed food. But people think, oh, olive oil is healthy, right? So let me take my greens and put 2 tablespoons of olive oil on. All of a sudden I have a 1,000-calorie salad, right? Well, it's 1,000 calories. No matter how healthy it is, it's 1,000 calories, 800 calories. It's oil. It's processed.
So like coconut oil and flaxseed oil and stuff, should that be refrigerated then?
I would refrigerate it all. Refrigerate. Coconut oil doesn't go bad nearly as quick. But flax oil, you buy it cold, you keep it cold.
Yeah, I was using coconut oil to cook.
Coconut oil to cook, yeah. Coconut oil to cook. Sunflower to cook. Coconut oil, yeah. There's oils that are better than others.
Right.
Butter works. If you consume butter, butter works. It's double bonded. It's saturated. It holds up better in a pan. Lard holds up better in a pan. So because they have 2 bonds, so there's a stronger oil. So there's a good book out there. I forgot the book on cooking oils where he describes the bonds and all that kind of stuff. He gets very scientific with it. So.
You keep saying GMO, so are you against all genetically modified organisms, including Mendelian selected?
I am. What do you mean? What's the last term used?
Mendelian.
What's that?
It's where you have that chart of 4 things, and you're breeding for a certain trait that you want.
You're breeding, or you're splicing genes?
You're breeding.
You're breeding.
Yes, but you're still modifying through selection.
You're still modifying through selection.
Yes.
I'm not as opposed to that as nearly as splicing genes and putting foreign products into it. So when I mean GMOs, I mean that,
Okay.
not the selective breeding, because really all the food we eat is selectively bred, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to eat anything. So, so yeah, the laboratory, which I'm sure they're both laboratory, right? They're both.
With that, you drop the modified out because you're not modifying, you're reblending.
It's like a.
Mendel with the sweetening plants.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Mendel, it's just
Yeah.
you're taking one trait and getting rid of it from a population by
Right.
breeding that trait. So now it doesn't
Yeah.
exist, and you only have this.
I'm against putting
modified.
BT into corn and potatoes.
Okay.
And rat genes into lettuce for flavor, which I did at University of Texas as an experiment. It never made it to the market, but they just, that was just lettuce taste.
So what's a good dressing when you're making the salad? And
I like aged balsamic.
Probably not.
100% aged balsamic. If you get into balsamic vinegars, there's a whole range of balsamic vinegars. Each one is different based upon how much must they add to it, how they cook the must. The must is the juice they add back into it, how it's aged, how they're infused. White, even though you can get white balsamic, even though balsamic's not white, but there are white balsamics in the market that are delicious, and you can just use that as your dressing. You can skip oil altogether. What, aged?
Aged balsamic.
Aged balsamic. Aged. Or like we use in the restaurant, we use Vincoto, which is they call it a balsamic elixir. They take Malvasia Nero and another wine grapes. They cook the juice as opposed to fermenting it raw. Cook the juice, reduce it, then ferment it, then oak age it. And we use the Vincoto on a few of our dishes. The ribeye has Vincoto. Yeah, so it's like a balsamic elixir. And then you can infuse figs in it. There's an orange one, there's a jalapeno one. They get really creative now with vinegars. I would suggest going to, not Whole Foods, the other one, Fairway in Jersey. They have a good selection of, they have a great selection of oil. If you want high quality oil, they have a really good selection of olive oils, and they have a good selection of vinegars. You can get really fancy with vinegars, and just vinegar. Now keep in mind, vinegar, you know, one can make an argument saying acetic acid is poison, and you're just diluting it by 20 parts, and you know, so you're going to talk to some health experts and say, no vinegar, no vinegar, no vinegar. So, just depends who you're listening to. So, the doctor's going to say, oh, olive oil's good. So it's just, but I avoid olive oil. I'd rather do the vinegar than the olive oil. So, lemon juice is good. I like grapefruits. I'll segment a grapefruit and just squeeze the rest of the juice right in my salad with romaine and throw a few nuts in there and tomatoes and cucumbers. Yeah, tomato. Yeah, I like that. I like fresh grapefruit juice as a dressing. So.
Did you ever have the eco shrimp from Newburgh?
I have not yet, and I'm supposed to go visit them. I have not. I'm excited to see what they're doing.
It's excellent.
I'm excited to see what they're doing. I forgot to mention them. Yeah. So, I'm actually going on Tuesday to a truffle oil producer. So he has about $1 million in truffles in stock right now. So over in Connecticut, yeah. So, because I did a video on olive oil and truffle oil. Truffle oil is, there's a lot of fraudulent truffle oil in the market. They synthetically alter or make the flavor, or they'll take broccoli and celery, are two things that mimic truffles. So they'll take broccoli and celery and infuse it into olive oil or whatever they extract, or I'm not sure how they exactly do it, but I'm going to find out exactly how he does truffle oil on Tuesday. So I'm taking the staff and we're going to a truffle warehouse. So it's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Any other questions? I'm going to just turn my mic off. I can still answer questions. I have gift cards for everybody who came.